Hey guys, tonight we begin with one of history's strangest missing objects. A gold-covered sacred chest that may or may not have melted faces, leveled cities, terrified kings, confused archaeologists, and inspired several thousand conspiracy documentaries narrated by men standing dramatically in deserts. So dim the lights a little. Maybe grab a blanket. Maybe pretend you are an exhausted medieval monk who accidentally wandered into the wrong archive room and now has to spend the next hour listening to increasingly bizarre stories about sacred furniture. Because tonight, we are talking about the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark is one of those historical mysteries that somehow became larger than history itself. It sits in that strange category occupied by Atlantis, the Holy Grail, and every royal family tree that looks less like genealogy and more like a complicated bread recipe gone wrong. Everyone wants the Ark to be something enormous. A secret weapon, an alien battery, a divine radio, a supernatural capacitor, a cosmic microwave chest. But at its core, the Ark begins as a very ancient religious object carried through deserts by deeply overwhelmed people who spent a remarkable amount of time panicking. And honestly, fair enough. The story begins in the ancient Near East, in a world of bronze tools, dust-covered roads, tribal warfare, complicated sacrifices, and kings who seemed permanently one mild inconvenience away from emotional collapse. Which, to be fair, remains a pretty consistent royal trait throughout history. Now, traditionally, according to the Hebrew Bible, the Ark of the Covenant was built during the time of Moses. Specifically after the Israelites escaped Egypt and began wandering through the wilderness for 40 years. 40 years is a very long camping trip, especially before modern plumbing. God gives Moses instructions for constructing the Ark atop Mount Sinai. And these instructions are extremely specific. Ancient sacred texts often become very detailed when discussing ritual furniture, measurements, rings, poles, gold overlay, cherubim, wood types, fabric layers. It is essentially divine interior decorating. The Ark itself was supposedly made from acacia wood and covered in gold inside and out. On top sat two golden cherubim with wings stretched toward each other. Inside the Ark were sacred objects tied to the covenant between God and the Israelites. Traditionally, the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments, possibly Aaron's staff, and a jar of manna, which means humanity's most famous missing artifact, may also have once functioned as a glorified snack container. History is beautiful that way. The Ark was not merely symbolic. According to biblical tradition, it represented the actual presence of God traveling with the Israelites, which meant carrying it was considered both sacred and deeply dangerous. Very dangerous. Certain rules surrounded the Arkansas strict rules. Priests handled it carefully using poles. Nobody casually touched it. Nobody treated it lightly. And unfortunately, throughout history, humans have demonstrated an almost supernatural ability to touch precisely the things they are explicitly told not to touch. One story tells of a man named Uzzah who tried to steady the Ark after the oxen carrying it stumbled. Reasonable reaction, honestly. Nobody wants sacred cargo tipping into dirt. But according to the account, touching the Ark killed him instantly, which probably made future transportation teams extremely nervous. Imagine being assigned Ark moving duty after that incident. You would approach the scheduled board with the emotional energy of a man discovering his name beside volcano inspection. And this reputation followed the ark everywhere. The Israelites carried it through the wilderness during their migrations. Priests bore it into battles. Trumpets sounded around it. Entire military campaigns revolved around its presence. At Jericho, according to tradition, the ark was carried around the city walls for 7 days before the walls collapsed. Now, historians debate the archaeology of Jericho constantly. Dates shift. Evidence gets argued over by exhausted scholars who spend decades staring at pottery fragments while quietly losing their remaining emotional stability. But regardless of literal interpretation, the ark's role in these stories matters enormously. It was not passive. The ark moved history, or at least ancient people believed it did. And belief itself can become a terrifying force. Eventually, the Israelites settled into Canaan and established kingdoms. Judges ruled. Tribal conflicts continued. Political alliances formed and dissolved every few years because ancient politics was essentially a continuous group project conducted by sleep-deprived warlords. Then came kings. First Saul, then David. And David's relationship with the ark becomes one of the most emotionally chaotic royal episodes in ancient history. David, future king of Israel, wanted Jerusalem established as both political and spiritual capital, which meant bringing the ark into the city. This was not simply a religious transfer. It was branding, royal branding, ancient edition. And David understood symbolism extremely well. The ark arrives amid celebration. Music plays. People dance. Sacrifices happen constantly. At one point, David dances so enthusiastically before the ark that his wife Michal watches from a window and basically develops secondhand embarrassment, which honestly feels very relatable. There is something timeless about witnessing someone become aggressively emotional at a public event while you quietly stare from another room thinking, "Please stop." But David's excitement reveals something important. The ark represented legitimacy, power, divine approval, and nearly every ruler in history desperately wants all three. Because ruling is difficult. People complain constantly. Taxes upset everyone. Crops fail. Armies mutiny. Cousins start rebellions because they think they deserve a crown more than you do, which, again, becomes a recurring theme for basically every monarchy ever created. The ark eventually resides within the tabernacle and later, according to tradition, within Solomon's temple. Now Solomon enters history carrying one of the most exaggerated reputations of any ancient king. Wise Solomon, rich Solomon, builder Solomon, collector of wives Solomon. The man reportedly had hundreds of wives and concubines, which sounds less like romance and more like administrative collapse. Imagine remembering anniversaries in that environment. Impossible. But Solomon's temple becomes central to the ark story because this is where the ark supposedly rests permanently within the Holy of Holies, the innermost sacred chamber. And this chamber was deeply restricted. Only the high priest could enter. Only at certain times. Under very specific ritual conditions, the ark sat at the center of sacred identity, which means its eventual disappearance became catastrophic. But we are not there yet. First, we must wander slowly through several centuries of kings making increasingly questionable decisions. Because ancient kingdoms rarely collapse suddenly. They usually decay through generations of poor leadership, internal conflict, foreign invasions, and men named something like Nebuchadnezzar arriving with siege equipment and deeply hostile intentions. The kingdoms of Israel and Judah faced constant instability. Assyrians invaded. Alliances shifted. Prophets warned everyone continuously. Kings ignored prophets continuously. Some things never change. Eventually, the northern kingdom of Israel falls to Assyria. Judah survives longer. Barely. And during these centuries, the Ark starts becoming strangely quiet in historical records. This is where historians begin leaning forward nervously, because ancient sources become fragmentary. Mentions decrease. Descriptions blur. The Ark fades into uncertainty. Now, eventually comes the great disaster, the Babylonian conquest. King Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon invades Jerusalem in the 6th century BCE. The temple is destroyed. Elites are deported into exile. Sacred treasures are looted. It is one of the defining catastrophes in Jewish history. And somewhere amid this destruction, the Ark disappears.
Gone.
No universally accepted record explains exactly what happened, which, naturally, transformed the Ark into one of humanity's favorite obsessions. People cannot resist missing objects, especially sacred missing objects. Especially sacred missing objects possibly connected to divine power. And so theories multiplied. Some believe priests hid the Ark before the Babylonians arrived. Others think it was destroyed. Some claim it was carried into Egypt. Others insist it eventually reached Ethiopia. And Ethiopia becomes one of the Ark's most fascinating chapters. According to Ethiopian tradition, the Ark resides in the city of Aksum, guarded within the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion. Only one guardian monk may view it. Just one. His entire life becomes dedicated to guarding the Ark, which is either profoundly sacred or the most intense museum security assignment in human history. No independent scholar has conclusively examined the object said to be the Arkansas, which means debate continues endlessly. And people love debating the Ark. Archaeologists debate it. Theologians debate it. Conspiracy theorists debate it while drawing alarming diagrams involving energy fields and pyramids. And Hollywood eventually joined the conversation too. Because of course it did. Few objects received a cinematic glow-up, quite like the Ark of the Covenant in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Suddenly the Ark became associated with secret warehouses, exploding Nazis, supernatural storms, and Harrison Ford looking exhausted while everyone around him makes catastrophic decisions, which honestly remains a very accurate summary of many historical events. The film helps cement the Ark within modern imagination as both ancient relic and unstoppable weapon. But interestingly, ancient texts themselves often describe similar fears. The Ark brought victory, but also danger. When captured by the Philistines according to biblical accounts, disasters supposedly struck Philistine cities. Tumors,
Panic.
chaos, religious confusion. The Philistines eventually returned it because apparently possessing the Ark became more stressful than beneficial, which feels deeply human. Imagine stealing something so cursed that you immediately regret the entire operation. Ancient history contains many moments like this. Now, historically speaking, scholars approach these stories differently. Some see literal divine intervention. Others interpret them symbolically. Others examine how sacred objects function psychologically and politically within societies. Because objects matter enormously in human civilization.
Crowns,
Thrones, relics, bones of saints, imperial swords, royal jewels. Humans attach emotional meaning to physical things constantly. And when civilizations collapse, those objects become even more powerful in memory, especially when they vanish, because disappearance creates myth, and myth expands to fill silence. Over centuries, the Ark accumulated layer after layer of speculation. Medieval writers connected it to hidden wisdom. Mystics associated it with divine mysteries. Treasure hunters searched deserts. Crusaders became fascinated with relics generally because medieval Europe developed a truly astonishing appetite for collecting sacred body parts. At one point, Europe contained enough claimed fragments of the true cross to theoretically construct several moderately sized fishing boats. People desperately wanted physical proximity to holiness. And the Ark represented the ultimate sacred object, or perhaps the ultimate missing object,
which is even more seductive.
because certainty ends stories. Mystery keeps them alive forever. And the Ark survives precisely because nobody can definitively produce it. No universally accepted discovery. No museum exhibit. No peer-reviewed conclusion that settles everything calmly while everyone nods politely and goes home. Instead, the Ark remains suspended between religion, archaeology, legend, nationalism, and imagination, which means every generation reinvents it slightly. Victorian explorers imagined exotic biblical adventures. 20th century filmmakers imagined supernatural warfare. Modern internet theorists imagine hidden tunnels beneath Jerusalem monitored by secret organizations that somehow apparently have unlimited funding and terrible communication skills. Meanwhile, historians quietly sit surrounded by excavation reports muttering, "Can we please focus on pottery layers for 5 minutes?" But the mystery persists. And honestly, it probably always will, because the Ark is no longer just an object. It became a container for human longing itself, faith longing for proof, empires longing for legitimacy, explorers longing for discovery, and ordinary people longing for mystery in a world that often feels overexplained. Which may be why the Ark still fascinates exhausted people late at night scrolling through documentaries while wrapped in blankets. There is comfort in unresolved ancient things. Something soothing about knowing history still contains locked doors. Even if behind those doors sits nothing more supernatural than an old wooden chest surrounded by centuries of storytelling. Still, what storytelling it became. And unfortunately for everyone involved, history is absolutely filled with rulers, priests, conquerors, and eccentric treasure hunters who decided they personally would solve the Ark mystery once and for all. Which, as we gently drift onward, leads us into medieval Ethiopia, paranoid crusaders, deeply questionable archaeology, and several men who absolutely should not have been trusted with shovels. So let's float quietly over to another historical disaster. So the ark disappears from the biblical narrative, and naturally humanity responds in the calmest possible way, by inventing hundreds of competing theories over the next 2,000 years. Some theories were thoughtful, some were religious, some were political, and some sounded like a man drank 3 cups of coffee, stared at a map for 40 seconds, and announced, "Obviously the ark is hidden beneath my cousin's vineyard." This is the beautiful chaos of historical mystery. And among all the ark traditions, perhaps none became more enduring or emotionally powerful than the Ethiopian story. Because in Ethiopia, the ark was never truly lost. According to Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, the Ark of the Covenant rests safely in the city of Aksum, protected inside the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally, the actual Ark, which is a fairly bold historical claim. And Ethiopia's relationship with the Ark begins with another legendary figure entirely, the Queen of Sheba. Now, the Queen of Sheba occupies that wonderful category of ancient person where history, mythology, and royal public relations all become hopelessly tangled together. She appears in biblical tradition visiting King Solomon. She appears in Islamic tradition. She appears in Ethiopian tradition. Everyone wanted her attached to their story because mysterious wealthy queens tend to improve historical branding considerably. And according to Ethiopian legend, the Queen of Sheba, known as Makeda, visited Solomon in Jerusalem. The two supposedly had a son named Menelik, which already sounds like the beginning of a very complicated inheritance dispute. Menelik later travels to Jerusalem as a young man. Solomon is delighted. Priests become involved. Sacred history unfolds dramatically. And eventually, according to the Ethiopian narrative recorded in the Kebra Nagast, Menelik returns to Ethiopia carrying the ark itself, apparently without Solomon fully realizing what was happening, which means one of history's wisest kings may have accidentally misplaced the single holiest object in his kingdom. Not ideal. Though to be fair, Solomon reportedly managed an empire, massive construction projects, diplomatic alliances, economic trade networks, and approximately 1,000 romantic relationships simultaneously. At that point, forgetting one sacred artifact may simply reflect administrative exhaustion. The Ethiopian story becomes foundational to Ethiopian Christian identity. The ark is not merely a relic there. It symbolizes divine favor, legitimacy, continuity, and sacred destiny. And for centuries, Ethiopian rulers tied their authority to this tradition, which is something monarchies do constantly. Kings love sacred objects. Absolutely love them. If a ruler can connect himself to divine approval through a holy relic, he immediately gains political credibility. Suddenly, rebellion stops being merely political disagreement and starts feeling spiritually awkward. Very convenient arrangement. And Ethiopian Christianity developed in fascinating isolation for centuries. While Europe stumbled through plagues, feudal wars, alarming dental situations, and endless arguments about succession, Ethiopia maintained one of the world's oldest Christian traditions with its own rituals, texts, architecture, and sacred legends. European travelers eventually encountered Ethiopia with a mixture of fascination and confusion, which was common for medieval travelers generally. Most medieval travel writing reads like exhausted men wandering into unfamiliar cities and reacting emotionally to vegetables. But Ethiopia especially captivated outsiders because it felt ancient, distant, and mysterious. And once Europeans heard rumors about the Ark residing there, interest intensified enormously, partly because medieval Christians adored relics, and partly because medieval Europe suffered from a severe collective condition historians might politely describe as holy object enthusiasm, which is a gentle way of saying people became astonishingly intense about sacred artifacts, saint bones, fragments of robes, pieces of crowns, holy nails, holy cups, holy splinters. At one point, almost every cathedral possessed at least one deeply questionable relic guarded with absolute confidence. And nobody wanted to be the bishop who admitted, honestly, this may just be an old chicken bone. So when stories circulated that Ethiopia possessed the Ark itself, imaginations exploded. Now the Guardian tradition in Aksum remains particularly fascinating. According to custom, one monk dedicates his life entirely to guarding the Arkansas. Once chosen, he never leaves the grounds again. He lives beside the sacred object until death, which sounds both profoundly spiritual and unbelievably stressful. Imagine spending decades responsible for humanity's most famous missing artifact. Every morning you wake up thinking, well, better not lose the Ark today. No pressure whatsoever. And because access is forbidden, mystery survives beautifully intact. No comprehensive modern examination. No broad scholarly inspection. No dramatic unveiling under museum lighting. Just silence, ritual, and guarded tradition, which is precisely the kind of environment where legends flourish forever. Now historians remain divided about Ethiopia's claims. Some scholars argue the tradition emerged centuries after the biblical period. Others note the deep cultural significance regardless of literal authenticity. And some simply acknowledge that sacred history often operates differently from modern historical methodology, because religious traditions are not laboratory experiments. They carry identity, memory, meaning, civilizational emotion, and people defend those things fiercely, especially when outsiders arrive demanding proof while carrying notebooks and very smug expressions. Meanwhile, Europe continued obsessing over Jerusalem itself, particularly during the Crusades. Now the Crusades are one of those historical subjects where nearly every participant behaved with tremendous confidence and deeply questionable judgment. Beginning in the late 11th century, European Christians launched military campaigns toward the Holy Land. Popes preached, knights marched, kingdoms formed temporary alliances. Thousands died from warfare, disease, starvation, or simply terrible logistics. Medieval travel remained brutally difficult, and yet enormous armies somehow looked at the Eastern Mediterranean and collectively said, yes, let us walk there wearing chainmail. Remarkable optimism. Jerusalem became emotionally charged beyond measure. It was sacred geography, layered atop sacred geography. Jews, Christians, and Muslims all connected profound spiritual meaning to the city, which unfortunately made peaceful compromise somewhat difficult. During the Crusader period, relic hunting intensified further, because conquering holy cities apparently convinced many Europeans that they should immediately begin searching basements for legendary objects. The Ark naturally entered speculation. Where was it hidden? Had priests concealed it beneath the Temple Mount? Did secret chambers still exist? Had ancient guardians protected it for centuries, waiting for the correct moment? Humans love imagining hidden chambers, particularly beneath ancient cities. Every old tunnel immediately inspires theories involving treasure, prophecies, or dramatically hooded organizations speaking in whispers. And Jerusalem possessed tunnels everywhere. Layers upon layers of civilization buried beneath itself. Ancient stones beneath medieval stones beneath Ottoman stones beneath modern streets. History stacked like exhausted pancakes. The Knights Templar eventually became tangled in Ark mythology too. Of course they did. The Templars attract mystery the way abandoned castles attract fog. Originally founded to protect pilgrims in the Holy Land, the Templars evolved into a wealthy military order with enormous financial influence. They became bankers, landowners, administrators, warriors, essentially medieval corporate warrior monks with impressive branding. Naturally, people later assumed they possessed every lost secret imaginable. The Holy Grail, hidden treasure, secret bloodlines, advanced wisdom, possibly excellent wine cellars. And inevitably, theories emerged claiming the Templars discovered the Ark beneath Jerusalem. Evidence remains extremely thin. But thin evidence has never discouraged conspiracy culture. In fact, conspiracy theories often thrive best precisely where evidence becomes vague enough to support unlimited imagination, which means the Ark fits perfectly. No confirmed location. No verified chain of custody. No final answer. Just enough ancient documentation to keep everyone emotionally invested forever. Then came the 19th century. And 19th century archaeology was an extraordinary mixture of genuine scholarship and glorified treasure hunting conducted by men with magnificent facial hair. Victorian explorers approached the ancient world with enormous confidence. Sometimes deserved, often not. European powers spread across the globe excavating ancient sites, collecting artifacts, and occasionally behaving like history itself was an estate sale. The Middle East attracted enormous attention because biblical archaeology became deeply fashionable. Explorers wanted physical confirmation of scripture. Newspapers loved sensational discoveries. Museums competed aggressively. And many expeditions operated with the archaeological precision of enthusiastic raccoons. Dig first. Document later. Possibly never. Entire ancient layers disappeared because someone became excited about finding giant statues quickly, which permanently horrifies modern archaeologists. Today, archaeology involves careful stratigraphy, documentation, context analysis, conservation, and painstaking patience. 19th century archaeology sometimes involved a man dynamiting part of a mound because he felt optimistic. Different times. And naturally, the Ark became a target for explorers convinced they personally would uncover history's greatest relic. One particularly famous figure was British explorer Montague Parker. Now Parker's expedition into Jerusalem in the early 20th century feels less like serious archaeology and more like a beautifully organized nervous breakdown. Parker became obsessed with theories proposed by a Finnish scholar named Walter Juvelius, who believed biblical codes revealed hidden temple treasures. Already dangerous territory. Whenever someone claims ancient secret codes reveal treasure locations, history usually prepares to become extremely embarrassing. Nevertheless, Parker assembled wealthy backers and launched excavations around Jerusalem. Secret excavations. At night, near highly sensitive religious locations, which, unsurprisingly, caused problems. Massive problems. Rumors spread rapidly that foreigners were stealing sacred treasures from beneath the Temple Mount itself. Panic erupted.
Crowds formed.
Ottoman authorities intervened. Parker fled Jerusalem disguised as a woman according to some accounts, which is an astonishing ending for an archaeological expedition. Imagine explaining that failure report. Did you find the Ark?
No.
But I escaped dressed as someone's aunt. And yet, even failed searches strengthened the Ark's legend, because every disaster implied the mystery remained alive. Still unsolved. Still waiting. Then 20th century pop culture transformed everything again, especially after Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1981. Now suddenly millions of people who previously spent very little time contemplating ancient Israelite ritual objects became deeply invested in Ark lore. The film presents the Ark as terrifying supernatural force capable of annihilating armies, which honestly aligns more closely with some ancient descriptions than people sometimes realize. Though real archaeology contains significantly fewer rolling boulders, mostly paperwork. Indiana Jones made archaeology look adventurous, dangerous, glamorous. Real archaeologists often spend weeks cataloging ceramic fragments while sunburned and emotionally dehydrated. Still important work, though. And after the film, Ark fascination exploded globally. Documentaries multiplied. Books appeared endlessly. Television specials dramatically zoomed into maps, while ominous music played underneath phrases like "forbidden secret." The internet eventually accelerated everything. Now anyone with 3 blurry photographs and a forum account could propose new Ark theories immediately. The Vatican has it. Ethiopia has it. Secret Israeli agencies have it. It rests beneath Jerusalem. It rests beneath a mountain. It rests in heaven temporarily because apparently divine artifact management has become very complicated. And somewhere amid all this speculation sits a quieter truth. The Ark matters because absence matters. Lost things haunt civilizations, especially sacred lost things, because they create a permanent ache in historical memory, a question without closure. And humans struggle terribly with unresolved questions. We want endings, locations, answers, preferably labeled clearly inside museums with informational plaques. But history often refuses such neat conclusions. Instead, it leaves gaps, fragments, silences. And into those silences, we pour imagination,
Faith. Fear. Hope.
national identity, and occasionally extremely questionable documentaries narrated by men standing beside helicopters. Still, among all Ark theories, one possibility continues unsettling historians most. Because if the Ark was hidden before Jerusalem fell, someone had to hide it. Someone knew where it went. And perhaps entire generations dedicated themselves to keeping that secret buried. Which leads us quietly onward into hidden tunnels, vanished priests, secret mountain churches, and several medieval kings who absolutely believed God had personally chosen them despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. So let's drift carefully onward into another royal catastrophe: national identity, and occasionally extremely questionable documentaries narrated by men standing beside helicopters. Still, among all ark theories, one possibility continues unsettling historians most. Because if the ark was hidden before Jerusalem fell, someone had to hide it. Someone knew where it went. And perhaps entire generations dedicated themselves to keeping that secret buried. Which leads us quietly onward into hidden tunnels, vanished priests, secret mountain churches, and several medieval kings who absolutely believed God had personally chosen them despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. So let's drift carefully onward into another royal catastrophe. So by the medieval period, the Ark of the Covenant had become less of an object and more of an atmosphere, a mood, a floating cloud of sacred uncertainty drifting through centuries of religious imagination. Nobody could fully prove where it was, which meant absolutely everyone felt qualified to speculate. And history is full of people who looked at an unsolved mystery and thought, clearly I alone possess the correct answer. This becomes especially dangerous when combined with religion, monarchy, and access to maps. Now, one of the persistent ideas surrounding the Ark is that Jewish priests hid it before the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC, which honestly makes sense. If your city is collapsing, enemy armies are approaching, and your holiest object is sitting inside the temple glowing with national importance, hiding it becomes a fairly reasonable afternoon activity. Ancient people hid valuables constantly:
coins,
scrolls, sacred vessels, royal treasures. There are entire archaeological discoveries built around someone burying possessions during wartime and never returning. History contains many tragic little moments like that. A man hides family silver beneath a floor during invasion. A priest conceals sacred scrolls in caves. A noblewoman seals jewelry inside walls during siege panic. And then centuries pass. Empires collapse. Languages vanish. Dust accumulates. Until eventually some exhausted archaeologist uncovers the whole thing while quietly wishing for better news. The Ark may fit into this pattern. Or perhaps not. That is the deeply inconvenient beauty of the subject. Now, according to one tradition recorded in the second book of Maccabees, the prophet Jeremiah hid the ark inside a cave on Mount Nebo before the Babylonian conquest, then sealed the entrance, then declared the location would remain unknown until God gathered the people again. Which is certainly one way to end a treasure map. Very dramatic. Ancient religious texts often understand theatrical timing surprisingly well. And naturally, once people hear hidden sacred cave, they immediately begin imagining torchlit tunnels and forgotten chambers beneath mountains. Human beings love secret caves. Honestly, we are still emotionally the same species that once stared into dark openings and thought, there may be treasure in there. Usually there was just moisture and disappointment, but occasionally history surprises everyone. Now Mount Nebo itself became deeply symbolic because tradition associates it with Moses viewing the promised land before his death, which means if the ark were hidden there, the symbolism would feel almost painfully perfect. Too perfect, perhaps. Historians often become suspicious when stories line up with poetic symmetry. Reality tends to be messier, far messier. Kings trip over carpets. Empires collapse because brothers argue. Treaties fail because someone feels insulted at dinner. History rarely unfolds with elegant narrative structure. Still, the Mount Nebo theory endured. And over centuries, various explorers searched caves throughout the region, hoping to discover evidence. Most found rocks. An enormous percentage of archaeology involves rocks. Sometimes very historically important rocks, but still rocks. Meanwhile, Jewish traditions concerning the Ark continued evolving after the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans in 70 CE. Because the absence of the Ark became woven into religious memory itself. The Holy of Holies stood empty during the Second Temple period according to many traditions. Imagine that for a moment. A sacred chamber designed around absence. An empty center. There is something strangely haunting about that. Almost poetic. The missing ark transformed into a symbol of loss, exile, and divine distance, which made later generations even more fascinated with recovering it. Humans often become obsessed with restoring imagined wholeness. Golden ages. Lost kingdoms, vanished relics. People constantly look backward, hoping to recover something they believe history stole from them, usually while wearing extremely uncomfortable clothing. Now, as Christianity spread through Europe and the Near East, the Ark acquired new symbolic meanings as well. Medieval theologians loved symbolism with astonishing intensity. Everything represented something else. Gardens symbolized purity. Lions symbolized kingship. Light symbolized divinity. Architectural measurements symbolized spiritual truths. At times, medieval thought resembles one giant, exhausted allegory. And the Ark became associated with holiness itself. Some Christian writers compared the Virgin Mary to the Ark because both supposedly carried divine presence. Others viewed the Ark as a foreshadowing of sacred covenant. Entire theological systems blossomed around symbolic interpretation. Meanwhile, ordinary medieval people mostly struggled with taxes, disease, crop failures, and trying not to freeze during winter. History always contains this interesting split between elite intellectual debates and average daily existence. Scholars write elaborate treatises while peasants wonder whether the goat escaped again. Both realities matter. Now, during the medieval centuries, Ethiopia continued developing its own profound relationship with Ark traditions. And Ethiopian churches possess something particularly fascinating called tablets. A tablet represents the Ark symbolically and ritually. Every Ethiopian Orthodox church contains one. It is treated with enormous reverence, which means Ark symbolism became embedded deeply into religious life itself. Not merely distant legend, living ritual. And Ethiopia's isolation helped preserve traditions that elsewhere evolved differently. European travelers reaching Ethiopia often reacted with amazement because they encountered ancient Christian practices unfamiliar to Western Europe. Stone churches carved into mountains, ancient liturgies, distinctive sacred music, powerful royal traditions, and rulers who trace legitimacy through sacred narratives tied to Solomon and the Ark. Which brings us naturally to medieval kings. Because medieval kings loved connecting themselves to biblical history almost as much as they loved wearing impractically heavy crowns, especially during periods of instability. And medieval kingdoms were unstable constantly. Dynasties collapsed every few generations. Children inherited thrones while still emotionally invested in chasing dogs around courtyards. Nobles betrayed each other continuously. Assassinations occurred with alarming frequency. At one point, European monarchy feels less like governance and more like an extremely tense family reunion conducted with swords. So sacred legitimacy mattered enormously. If a king could claim divine approval, opposition became spiritually dangerous. This is why rulers collected relics obsessively. Charlemagne gathered relics. Byzantine emperors gathered relics. French kings gathered relics. Everyone gathered relics. At times, medieval Europe resembles a giant competition to see who could acquire the most spiritually important cabinet collection. And the Ark remained the ultimate prize, though conveniently unattainable, which made it even more prestigious. Now, one particularly fascinating medieval figure tied indirectly to Ark traditions was Prester John. Prester John was a legendary Christian king supposedly ruling somewhere far beyond Europe. Depending on the century, people placed his kingdom in India, Central Asia, or Ethiopia. The details changed constantly. The confidence never did. Europeans became obsessed with finding Prester John because they desperately wanted powerful Christian allies against Muslim empires. Also because medieval maps contained enormous blank spaces where imagination could thrive beautifully. People projected fantasies onto distant lands constantly. And eventually Ethiopia became strongly associated with the Prester John legend. European visitors arrived expecting miraculous kingdoms filled with hidden wisdom, sacred relics, and perhaps mildly confusing architecture. Reality, as usual, proved more complicated, though still fascinating. Ethiopian emperors themselves navigated extraordinary political pressures, internal rivalries, regional conflicts, religious tensions, foreign invasions, court intrigue, which means they behaved remarkably similarly to nearly every other royal dynasty in human history. The crowns differed. The stress remained universal. One emperor in particular, Zara Yaqub, ruled in the 15th century with intense religious devotion combined with what historians might gently describe as high emotional volatility. He centralized religious authority aggressively, enforced strict observance, and became deeply invested in theological uniformity, which is another recurring royal hobby. Kings constantly believe unity can be achieved if everyone simply obeys harder. It rarely works. Still, Ethiopian rulers maintained powerful sacred identity through these centuries. And European fascination with Ethiopia intensified because it represented something unusual, an ancient African Christian empire surviving amid enormous regional pressures. That alone captured imaginations. Add Ark traditions, and interest became nearly mythic. Meanwhile, back in Europe, another phenomenon emerged during the Renaissance and early modern period. Secret societies, or at least people claiming involvement in secret societies. And once secret societies appear, the arc inevitably follows within about 15 minutes. Because mysterious organizations and missing sacred objects naturally attract each other like moths to dramatic lighting. The Freemasons eventually became linked to Ark mythology through symbolic traditions associated with Solomon's Temple. Now, actual historical Freemasonry is already complicated enough, without internet mythology adding laser beams and underground vaults. But symbolic references to temple building and sacred wisdom encouraged endless speculation. Some people became convinced hidden brotherhoods guarded ancient secrets passed down from biblical times. Again, evidence remained thin. But thin evidence never stopped anyone before. Especially not wealthy Europeans with leisure time and access to decorative robes. Now, throughout all these centuries, Jerusalem itself remained emotionally explosive. Empires controlled it one after another. Romans, Byzantines, Islamic caliphates, Crusaders, Ottomans, British authorities eventually, modern states later still, and every generation inherited accumulated sacred tension. The Temple Mount especially became one of the most sensitive religious locations on Earth, which makes archaeology there extraordinarily difficult, politically difficult, religiously difficult, emotionally difficult. Every stone carries significance. Every excavation sparks debate. Every rumor spreads instantly, which means Ark theories centered on Jerusalem never fully disappear. Some insist hidden chambers beneath the Temple Mount still conceal sacred treasures from Solomon's temple. Others argue the Babylonians certainly would have seized valuable artifacts if they existed. Some propose priestly escape networks. Others propose complete destruction. Meanwhile, archaeologists attempt careful analysis while surrounded by theology, politics, nationalism, and television crews desperately hoping for dramatic footage. Not an easy profession. And through it all, the Ark remains elusive. No confirmed fragments. No universally accepted documentation. Nothing definitive enough to silence debate, which strangely strengthens belief rather than weakening it. Because mystery generates endurance. People continue searching precisely, because nobody succeeded conclusively before. And the longer the mystery survives, the larger it grows. Eventually, the Ark stops belonging to one religion or one culture entirely. It becomes global mythology. Adventure stories claim it. Documentaries claim it. Novelists claim it. Conspiracy theorists absolutely claim it. At this point, the Ark probably has one of the busiest imaginary travel schedules in human history. Yet underneath all the speculation lies something more human and quieter. The Ark represents longing for contact with the sacred, a tangible sign that history contains meaning beyond random suffering and political collapse. And humans crave that desperately. Especially during uncertain times. Perhaps that is why every age rediscovers the Ark in its own way. Ancient Israelites carried it through wilderness uncertainty. Medieval kingdoms tied it to divine legitimacy. Victorian explorers chased it through imperial fantasy. Modern audiences encounter it through films and late-night documentaries while half asleep beneath blankets. The form changes. The longing remains. Still, history has one more habit that complicates everything further. Because whenever an object becomes sufficiently legendary, people eventually start claiming they personally possess it. And unfortunately for exhausted historians everywhere, the modern world contains several alleged arcs, multiple competing guardians, mysterious churches, disputed relics, and at least a few individuals who definitely purchased something suspicious from an antique dealer. So, let's quietly wander onward into modern obsessions, eccentric explorers, and the surprisingly emotional human need to believe that ancient mysteries can still be solved. By the modern era, the Ark of the Covenant had evolved into something wonderfully complicated. Part sacred relic, part national symbol, part historical mystery, part entertainment franchise, and entirely impossible to discuss calmly at family dinners once conspiracy enthusiasts become involved. Because the Ark inspires certainty in people. Extraordinary certainty. The kind of certainty usually reserved for men explaining barbecue techniques or medieval kings insisting their third cousin absolutely intended treason. Now, the 19th and 20th centuries transformed ancient history dramatically. Archaeology became more scientific. Museums expanded.
Biblical scholarship evolved.
Empires excavated enormous portions of the Middle East while transporting artifacts across oceans with varying levels of ethical awareness. And amid all this activity, the Ark remained absent, which only intensified interest, because a missing artifact becomes more powerful every year it stays missing, especially when connected to sacred texts read by billions of people. Now, one important shift occurred during this period. People stopped viewing the Ark purely as a religious object and increasingly treated it like a historical puzzle. Could archaeology solve it? Could hidden inscriptions reveal clues? Could forgotten tunnels beneath Jerusalem still conceal ancient chambers? And perhaps most importantly, could wealthy adventurers convince investors to fund extremely questionable expeditions? The answer to that final question was repeatedly yes. History contains an endless supply of rich men willing to finance terrible ideas. Now, during the late 19th century, European and American fascination with the biblical world reached astonishing levels. Explorers marched across deserts, wearing hats large enough to shade small villages. Painters created dramatic scenes of ancient Jerusalem glowing beneath heavenly sunlight. Writers described the Holy Land with emotional intensity normally reserved for tragic romance novels. And archaeologists dug almost everywhere. Some carefully, some enthusiastically, some with the delicate precision of hungry badgers. Still, genuine discoveries emerged constantly. Ancient inscriptions, forgotten cities, royal seals, burial chambers. Entire civilizations gradually resurfaced from beneath sand and stone, which gave people dangerous hope. Because once archaeology successfully uncovers Troy, Egyptian tombs, Assyrian palaces, and buried temples, suddenly everyone starts thinking, well, obviously the Ark must be next. Unfortunately, archaeology rarely works according to cinematic timing. Most excavations produce years of slow analysis punctuated occasionally by broken pottery. Important broken pottery. But still, not quite Indiana Jones diving through collapsing tunnels while orchestras scream dramatically in the background. Real archaeologists often spend entire afternoons debating dirt colors. And honestly, they seem very happy doing it. Now, one particularly important figure in biblical archaeology was William Foxwell Albright. Albright helped establish archaeology as a more rigorous academic discipline connected to biblical studies. He approached ancient texts seriously while also emphasizing material evidence, which was useful because previous generations occasionally approached archaeology with the methodological discipline of excited tourists. But even as scholarship improved, the Ark remained elusive. No verified discovery emerged, and this absence created a strange divide. Professional historians grew cautious. Popular culture grew increasingly imaginative. These two groups frequently stared at each other across documentaries with mutual exhaustion. Historians would say, there is insufficient evidence for that conclusion. Meanwhile, television narrators whispered dramatically about hidden energy chambers beneath Solomon's temple. Different vibes entirely. Now, during the 20th century, Ethiopia's Ark tradition continued attracting enormous international attention, especially because Ethiopia remained one of the few African nations to resist long-term European colonization successfully. This gave Ethiopian traditions a remarkable continuity and cultural resilience. The Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum became almost mythical internationally. Pilgrims visited. Researchers speculated. Journalists wrote articles filled with phrases like ancient secret and guarded mystery, which editors absolutely adore. The guardian monk tradition especially fascinated outsiders. One solitary guardian dedicating his entire existence to protecting the Ark. No public display. No scientific examination. No photographs accepted universally as proof. Just faith. And honestly, mystery survives best when protected by silence. Now in the 1990s, British writer Graham Hancock helped reignite massive public interest in the Ethiopian Ark theory through his book The Sign and the Seal. Hancock traveled extensively through Ethiopia investigating traditions surrounding the Ark. He argued seriously that the Ark may indeed reside there. The book became enormously influential, also controversial. Professional scholars debated Hancock intensely. Some appreciated the attention brought to Ethiopian traditions. Others criticized speculative leaps and evidentiary weaknesses, which is a polite academic phrase meaning, "Sir, you are connecting dots with emotional enthusiasm." Still, the book succeeded because it captured something powerful. The emotional appeal of historical mystery. People love the possibility that legendary objects survive hidden just beyond ordinary visibility. Especially sacred objects. Especially sacred objects protected by ancient guardians inside remote churches. That is practically irresistible storytelling. And honestly, history often does contain astonishing survivals. Ancient manuscripts hidden in monasteries. Buried armies in China. Roman cities beneath modern streets. Forgotten tombs sealed for millennia. Reality occasionally behaves like fiction just enough to keep everyone hopeful. Now, the Ark also became entangled with growing modern fascination surrounding the Temple Mount, which remains one of the most politically and religiously sensitive locations on Earth. The site carries immense significance for Judaism, Islam, and Christianity simultaneously, which means even minor archaeological activity can trigger enormous controversy. And naturally, this environment attracts people convinced hidden biblical treasures still lie beneath the mound itself. Various groups proposed tunnel systems, secret vaults, priestly hiding places, ancient repositories of sacred vessels. Some theories became extremely elaborate. Humans adore elaborate theories, especially theories involving maps covered in arrows. At some point, every treasure mystery acquires at least one individual standing beside a corkboard connecting unrelated locations with red string. It is almost mandatory. Now, among the more unusual modern art claims are stories involving secret government possession. Because eventually every ancient mystery gets assigned to shadowy authorities. The Vatican supposedly has it. Israel supposedly has it. American intelligence agencies supposedly studied it. British imperial officials supposedly hid it. At this stage, the Ark's imaginary travel itinerary resembles that of an exhausted diplomat. And these theories persist partly because modern society already feels opaque and bureaucratic. Governments keep secrets constantly. Military projects remain classified. Archives stay sealed. So people naturally wonder whether major historical discoveries might also disappear into hidden storage. Popular imagination fills the gaps immediately. Though realistically, maintaining total secrecy around humanity's most famous missing artifact would require extraordinary coordination. And history suggests humans are spectacularly bad at coordinated secrecy, especially large institutions. Someone always talks, usually immediately. Now, another fascinating aspect of Ark mythology involves attempts to explain its alleged powers scientifically. This became especially popular during the 20th century. Some writers proposed the Ark functioned as an electrical device. Others imagined radioactive materials. Some suggested hallucinogenic rituals surrounding it created supernatural perceptions. And a few theories became so scientifically adventurous they essentially floated into outer space. Ancient aliens eventually arrive in almost every unsolved mystery. Apparently, extraterrestrials maintain a very active interest in archaeological ambiguity. Now, to be fair, ancient people absolutely described sacred experiences using language modern readers interpret dramatically. Thunder,
Fire.
divine presence, voices, radiance, and sacred objects often inspired profound fear. But fear itself can be socially powerful without requiring supernatural technology. Ritual objects become emotionally charged through collective belief. Entire societies organize around symbols constantly. Flags,
Crowns.
constitutions, relics. Humans grant meaning immense power. Sometimes enough power to reshape civilizations, which may actually be more impressive than laser beams. Now, meanwhile, real archaeological discoveries connected to ancient Israel continued emerging gradually. Seal impressions, administrative buildings, fragments of inscriptions, evidence of kingdoms, warfare, trade, and political upheaval. The ancient world became more visible year by year. Yet the Ark remained stubbornly absent. And perhaps absence itself became the point. because the Ark survives culturally precisely because it cannot be settled conclusively. If tomorrow archaeologists uncovered undeniable proof the Ark was destroyed in antiquity, some mystery would vanish forever. Likewise, if a verified Ark appeared inside a museum display case beside gift shop magnets, mystery would collapse into inventory management. Instead, the Ark occupies a unique middle ground, plausible enough to inspire belief, unresolved enough to sustain imagination. Now, this unresolved quality also made the Ark perfect for modern entertainment, documentaries especially. Television producers absolutely adore ancient mysteries because they combine three profitable ingredients: religion, treasure, and dramatic narration. Add helicopter footage over deserts and someone whispering, "What if everything we know is wrong?" And you essentially have an entire television season. The Ark appears constantly in popular media because it feels timeless, sacred but adventurous, historical but supernatural, serious but entertaining. And importantly, the mystery belongs to everyone now: religious believers, secular historians, movie fans,
conspiracy theorists,
curious insomniacs watching documentaries at 2 in the morning while eating crackers directly from the box. The Ark welcomes all audiences equally. Still, among all the modern searches and theories, one emotional pattern repeats constantly. People searching for the Ark often seem to search for something larger too:
certainty,
meaning, connection, proof that history contains hidden coherence beneath centuries of chaos. And perhaps that desire becomes strongest during unstable times:
wars,
political upheaval, rapid technological change, moments when societies feel spiritually untethered. In such periods, ancient mysteries become comforting, strangely enough, because they suggest the world still contains wonder beyond ordinary routine. Now, nowhere does this emotional longing appear more clearly than among 20th century explorers who dedicated years of their lives chasing biblical artifacts through deserts, monasteries, libraries, and ruins. Some became respected scholars, some became eccentric wanderers, and some drifted so deeply into obsession that the line between research and personal mythology quietly disappeared. History contains many people like this. Men who begin searching for one ancient object and eventually end up emotionally living inside the mystery itself. The Ark does that to people. Perhaps because it represents ultimate discovery, not merely treasure, not merely archaeology, but contact with something transcendent, something that would make history suddenly feel immediate and alive. Of course, history usually responds to these dreams by handing researchers another box of pottery fragments. Still valuable, though. Very valuable. And yet, despite every failed expedition, every disputed theory, every academic argument, the Ark remains astonishingly alive in global imagination. Few ancient objects maintain such cultural power. Pharaohs have tombs. Roman emperors have statues. Medieval kings have graves. But the Ark has uncertainty, and uncertainty can survive forever, especially when tied to faith, especially when tied to loss, especially when tied to the deeply human suspicion that somewhere, hidden behind locked doors or buried beneath ancient stone, history still guards secrets we are not entirely ready to understand. Which naturally leads us onward into perhaps the strangest phase of the Ark story yet. Because eventually modern politics, nationalism, prophecy movements, and apocalyptic expectations all became tangled together around this missing golden chest. And whenever prophecy enters politics, everyone involved becomes dramatically more stressed. So let us drift quietly onward into 20th century Jerusalem, prophetic obsession, and several groups who became absolutely convinced the end of history was approaching any minute now. By the 20th century, the Ark of the Covenant had fully escaped the boundaries of ordinary history. It was no longer just an ancient religious artifact. It had become prophetic, apocalyptic, political, and somehow also a regular feature on late-night television narrated by men who sounded permanently concerned about underground tunnels, which is quite a career journey for one wooden chest. Now, to understand why the Ark became so emotionally explosive in modern times, we need to drift gently into Jerusalem again. Poor Jerusalem. Few cities in human history have carried so much accumulated emotional pressure. Empires fought over it. Religions sanctified it. Pilgrims crossed continents to reach it. And politicians continuously discovered that governing it peacefully was approximately as easy as organizing a family dinner between rival medieval dynasties. The city contains layers of sacred memory stacked directly atop one another. And at the center of much of this tension sits the Temple Mount, or Haram al-Sharif, depending on religious tradition and historical perspective. For Jews, it is the location of the ancient temples, including Solomon's Temple, where the Ark supposedly rested within the Holy of Holies. For Muslims, it contains the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, among Islam's holiest sites. For Christians, it remains deeply tied to biblical history and prophetic expectation. So naturally, absolutely everyone approaches the site with enormous emotion, which makes archaeological discussions there feel less like academic debate and more like attempting surgery during an active thunderstorm. Now, during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, growing Zionist movements, collapsing empires, and European colonial interests transformed the region politically. The Ottoman Empire weakened. National identities intensified. Religious expectations grew sharper. And the Ark quietly floated through all these tensions like an ancient ghost. Because for some religious groups, especially certain apocalyptic movements, recovering the Ark became connected to future prophecy. Not merely history, future history, which is where things become particularly intense. Now, apocalyptic thinking has existed for thousands of years. Humans consistently suspect the world may be ending soon. Ancient Romans suspected it. Medieval monks suspected it. Victorians suspected it. Modern internet users suspect it roughly every Thursday afternoon. There is something deeply human about interpreting uncertain times through cosmic narratives. Wars feel larger. Political upheavals feel symbolic. Ancient prophecies suddenly seem relevant again. And Jerusalem often sits at the center of these expectations, especially among groups focused on biblical prophecy concerning a future temple. Now, according to some interpretations, rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem plays an important role in future prophetic events. And if one hopes to rebuild the temple properly, questions naturally arise. Where exactly would it stand? What rituals would return? And perhaps most dramatically of all, what happened to the Ark? Suddenly, the missing artifact becomes more than historical curiosity. It becomes spiritually urgent. Certain religious groups began actively preparing for future temple restoration. Organizations researched ancient priestly rituals. Sacred vessels were recreated. Priestly garments were designed according to biblical descriptions. Training programs emerged for ritual practice, which from the outside can appear both deeply sincere and mildly surreal. Modern people using advanced technology to prepare rituals described thousands of years ago. History folding back onto itself. Now, one organization frequently discussed in this context is the Temple Institute in Jerusalem. The institute focuses on research and preparation connected to temple traditions. And naturally, because the internet exists, many people immediately concluded hidden Ark discoveries must be happening constantly behind closed doors. Rumors spread endlessly. Secret excavations, hidden chambers, ancient tunnels, priests guarding sacred knowledge. At this point, Jerusalem has acquired enough conspiracy theories to supply several civilizations simultaneously. Now, to be clear, actual archaeology beneath and around the Temple Mount remains extraordinarily sensitive. Political tensions alone make extensive excavation immensely difficult. Religious concerns amplify everything further. Every action becomes symbolic. Every rumor becomes international news, which means even small discoveries can trigger enormous speculation. And speculation surrounding the Ark thrives best in emotionally charged environments. Now, during the 20th century, another major factor intensified Ark fascination dramatically: the establishment of the modern State of Israel in 1948. For many people worldwide, biblical history suddenly felt geographically immediate again. Ancient names returned to newspapers daily. Jerusalem became central to global politics. Prophetic interpretations surged among various religious communities. And naturally, people began wondering whether ancient sacred objects might eventually resurface too. Because humans love narrative symmetry. If ancient Israel returned politically, perhaps ancient relics might return physically. At least emotionally, the ideas became linked for many observers. Now, meanwhile, archaeology itself became increasingly professional and scientific, which created an interesting contrast. On one side stood careful scholarship emphasizing evidence, context, and methodological caution. On the other stood popular fascination racing ahead, fueled by prophecy, mystery, nationalism, and television specials with dramatic background music. The two worlds occasionally intersected awkwardly. A cautious archaeologist might spend years analyzing ceramic sequences while journalists repeatedly ask, "Yes, but have you found the Ark yet?" Exhausting profession. Now, among the more persistent modern Ark theories are claims that the artifact already has been discovered secretly. Some theories suggest Israeli authorities found it during excavations but concealed the discovery to avoid global upheaval. Others claim Vatican archives contain hidden documentation proving its location. A few theories even involve international agreements to suppress knowledge of the Ark because humanity supposedly is not prepared, which always raises interesting questions. Humanity is apparently prepared for nuclear weapons, social media, and reality television competitions involving cake decoration. but not ancient furniture. Curious line to draw. Still, secrecy theories endure because hidden knowledge fascinates people enormously, especially sacred hidden knowledge. The Dead Sea Scroll discoveries during the mid-20th century intensified this fascination further. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls genuinely were astonishing. Ancient Jewish texts hidden in caves for nearly 2,000 years, accidentally rediscovered by shepherds. History occasionally produces discoveries so dramatic that they almost encourage further unrealistic expectations. Because once hidden scrolls emerge successfully from desert caves, suddenly everyone becomes convinced more enormous secrets must still wait underground, possibly around the next corner, maybe behind suspicious rocks. And if ancient scrolls survived hidden for millennia, why not the Ark too? Reasonable emotional leap, honestly. Now, another fascinating aspect of modern Ark obsession involves how different groups project their anxieties onto it. Religious groups see prophecy. Nationalists see legitimacy. Conspiracy theorists see hidden power structures. Adventure enthusiasts see treasure. Filmmakers see excellent box office potential. Everyone reshapes the Ark according to personal longing. And perhaps this reflects something broader about sacred objects generally. People rarely encounter them neutrally. Instead, they arrive carrying hopes already prepared. Now, during periods of war and instability, Ark interest often spikes noticeably. This happened during both world wars, during Cold War anxieties, during Middle Eastern conflicts, and especially during moments when global events feel uncertain or frightening. Ancient mysteries become strangely comforting then. They suggest continuity across chaos. Civilizations rise and collapse, yet some sacred stories endure. The Ark survived Babylonian destruction, at least in memory. Perhaps humanity hopes certain meanings survive modern crises too. Now, of course, popular culture kept accelerating Ark mythology throughout all this. Documentaries multiplied constantly. Bookshelves filled with speculative histories. Television channels discovered viewers absolutely loved ancient mysteries narrated in extremely serious voices. And the Ark became nearly unavoidable in this genre, especially because it blends religion and adventure so perfectly. A missing golden relic hidden somewhere in the ancient world. Honestly, it almost feels engineered for storytelling. Now, the internet age transformed everything further. Before the internet, Ark theories spread through books, lectures, and documentaries. After the internet, theories multiplied instantly across forums, videos, blogs, podcasts, and social media. Suddenly, anyone could become an Ark researcher after approximately 11 minutes online, which produced mixed results. Some people genuinely explored historical sources thoughtfully. Others connected random satellite images with biblical numerology while sounding extremely confident. Again, the internet contains multitudes. Now, among the strangest modern developments are attempts to map prophetic timelines around the Ark. Some groups became convinced rediscovery of the Ark would trigger world-changing events immediately.
Wars.
Messianic arrivals. Apocalyptic transformation. Political collapse. Divine judgment. Quite a lot of pressure for one artifact, honestly. Imagine being the person who accidentally uncovers the Ark during routine construction work. You arrive expecting ordinary excavation paperwork, and suddenly several prophecy communities start panicking simultaneously. Not an ideal Tuesday. Now, through all these modern obsessions, something interesting often gets overlooked. The Ark originally symbolized covenant, relationship, sacred law, presence. But over time, popular imagination gradually transformed it into spectacle,
Power.
weaponry, secret knowledge. Human beings consistently reinterpret sacred things through contemporary desires. Ancient Israelites viewed the Ark differently than medieval monks. Medieval monks viewed it differently than modern filmmakers. And modern audiences likely view it differently than future generations will too. History continuously rewrites emotional meaning. Still, despite every exaggeration and conspiracy theory, the Ark retains remarkable emotional gravity. Because beneath all the speculation lies a genuinely profound historical reality. Entire civilizations carried this object through memory for thousands of years. Wars happened around it. Empires feared it. Priests guarded traditions concerning it. Stories survived exile and destruction because people believed the Ark mattered deeply. That alone is extraordinary, whether the physical object survives or not. Now, perhaps the strangest irony of all is this. If the Ark truly exists somewhere hidden, modern humanity might actually struggle to respond rationally. Religious claims would erupt immediately. Governments would intervene. Scholars would debate authenticity endlessly. Political tensions would intensify overnight. Museums would panic politely. Internet conspiracy channels would achieve spiritual enlightenment. The object would instantly become the most controversial artifact on Earth, which means perhaps mystery itself protects the Ark better than any hidden chamber ever could. As long as uncertainty survives, no single nation or institution can fully claim it. The Ark belongs to imagination collectively. And imagination is very difficult to excavate scientifically. Still, as we continue drifting through this strange history, we eventually encounter perhaps the saddest aspect of all. Because behind every Ark theory, every expedition, every prophecy movement, and every obsessive search lies something painfully human. People searching for reassurance that history is not empty, that suffering means something, that sacredness once existed physically in the world, and perhaps still does somewhere. And honestly, that longing may explain the Ark's endurance more than any archaeological theory ever could. But unfortunately for everyone seeking calm spiritual reflection, the 20th century still had several more extremely dramatic Ark hunters waiting in line, including eccentric adventurers, politically ambitious visionaries, and at least one individual who became absolutely convinced ancient tunnels beneath Jerusalem would reveal civilization-changing secrets if people would simply hand him enough money and excavation equipment. So, let us float onward carefully into the final age of Ark obsession, where modern media, ancient longing, and human imagination all merge together into one very tired but strangely beautiful historical mystery.